Hello everyone, I am Frightening Findings, and we are back with 3 true scary Reddit stories. And in this one, we are covering part 2 of the night shift story, which I shared with you guys in a previous video. I will link that video in the description below if you want to go check it out. Let's get into these stories. Like in my previous post, I had heard many rumors and stories about people experiencing strange and eerie things. This was my starting point to find out what was really in the tunnels beneath the hospital. This post will explain the new experience I had while exploring these tunnels with my friend, who also works at the hospital. A bit of background, in case you missed the first post. The hospital I work in is the largest in Wales, UK, located in the capital city, Cardiff. It's quite old, with many areas that are unused and in a state of disrepair. Because it's such a big place, it's easy to get lost, and it can be very difficult to find your way out. There is a network of tunnels underneath the hospital, where the morgue is located, along with many abandoned rooms and corridors. It's dark, warm, smelly, dusty, and pretty creepy. This is where I had my own encounter with something dark. I won't go into all of that now, it's all in my original post, which is definitely worth a read. I decided that I wasn't ever going to set foot in the tunnels again, but I changed my mind for the sake of science. This is where my friend comes into the picture. I decided that if I was going to actively investigate the tunnels, I would need at least one other person. So who better to ask than my friend Ryan? Ryan is a tall, stocky gym guy, so at least I had a bodyguard. He also works in security, so he has a fairly decent idea of the layout of the tunnels. Perfect. Ryan didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. Well, he didn't until today. I had heard a story about a girl who was thought to haunt a couple of the abandoned rooms beneath the old children's wards. The children's hospital has a new, shiny building on the other side of the campus, so these old wards are now used as storage rooms and for patient file libraries. We decided to meet up in the evening to explore this area of the tunnel, as it was a hub for strange phenomena, and maybe, if we had time, we would try exploring some of the other active areas of the tunnel. We met outside the tunnel entrance at 9 p.m. and made a plan of action. First, we would make our way to the old area of the tunnels and the rooms where this girl was said to have been seen. Second, we would explore a little, as some of the equipment and furniture in the rooms were really old. Finally, we would sit in the middle of one of the rooms and just see what happened. Simple. Then, if we had time, we would just go for a wander. As I mentioned before, I had an experience in a tunnel a bit over a year ago, which is still fresh in my memory. But with Ryan there, I figured everything would be fine. We scanned our cards and the doors to the tunnels opened. I won't lie, I was very much on edge. We started walking into the tunnels and made our way through the first few sections. Then, suddenly, we realized we were in the old area of the building. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. The reality of what I was doing. Am I crazy? I asked myself. Then I reminded myself that this was for science. We got closer to the section of the tunnel we were planning to explore. The tunnels were dark and poorly lit. Ryan had to pull out his flashlight because it got so dark. He shone the light on the wall, revealing old paintings of animals, clowns, a circus, and painted faces that the children who attended the hospital had created and stuck on the walls. Perfect setting for a horror movie, isn't it? Honestly, it was creepy. but I kind of expected something like this, so we carried on. We finally got to the section of the tunnels we wanted to reach. We looked around a little and noticed a few doors. 2 were padlocked, one had a padlock that had rusted and was hanging on by a thread. The other door had rotted to the point of being basically dust. We put on our face masks because we're careful guys, and because black mold and asbestos are real things. We proceeded to enter the rotten doorway. Ryan flashed his torch around, but there wasn't much to see in there. Maybe a couple chairs and an old desk. Nothing worthwhile, so we moved to the next room. I pulled the rusted padlock, which disintegrated in my hands, and then pushed the door open. And man, the smell that hit us from that room was disgusting. There was a moldy, sticky liquid covering the entire floor. We noticed old gallon jerry cans of iodine and other chemicals that had spilled everywhere. The countless carcasses of dead mice and rats littering the floor were crazy. We decided to skip that room and try one of the more secure doors. This is where things got creepy. Ryan decided he would ram one of the old doors with his shoulder, thinking it would dislodge the old hinges and make the door swing open. It did not. Instead, we heard what sounded like tapping coming from the other side of the door. Ryan knocked on the door, thinking it was just a dripping pipe or maybe a rat nibbling at the door panel. He did it in the typical beat. The tapping instantly stopped. We waited a couple of seconds, but as Ryan went to knock again, the exact same beat knocked back at us. I froze and locked eyes with Ryan, and the utter shock on his face told me he'd probably made a massive mistake. Suddenly, before we even had a chance to run, Ryan passed out and fell into my arms. I wanted to run and leave him there, but he's my mate, and I know he wouldn't do that to me, so I started dragging him away from the door. The knocking stopped, and there was just complete silence. A few seconds later, Ryan started to wake up. Then, suddenly he shot up and screamed, "Manon!" I jumped a mile and asked, "What are you talking about?" He replied, "Manon, it's Manon." I looked at him and saw that he was staring into the darkness at the end of the tunnel. I realized that Manon was the girl who was supposed to haunt the area. Maybe she was the one who knocked back at us. I told Ryan that we should probably find our way out. We both stood up and slowly shuffled away from the door. As we turned to face the way we came, the door knocked again. Then the handle started to turn. At that point, I tapped out and started running to the exit. Ryan was running beside me, and we decided to take the longer way out since the shortcut had more dark areas, and at least the longer way was fairly well lit. But as we reached the cross junction, Ryan turned back and screamed. I had never heard him scream before. He turned me around, and there, in the middle of the corridor, was a floating black mist with glowing red eyes. The exact same thing I saw before. The face contorted and almost had a childlike appearance. It screamed and wailed at us, then just vanished. We couldn't get out of the tunnel fast enough. We managed to reach the exit, where we just collapsed on the floor and looked at each other. We both agreed not to tell anyone we work with about this, but we decided to get help from the hospital chaplains. But that thing was Manon. I'm convinced my house is haunted. Ever since my grandfather, who lived with us, became sick and after his recent death, My mother and I have noticed a drastic increase in unexplainable things happening inside our house. I always tried to dismiss it, but something happened one night that truly freaked me out. For some context, we live in the province of Alberta, and our house was built in the 1980s. According to my mom, when she first bought the house 13 years ago, there were no reported deaths in the house or any history in the land it sits on. To bring everything back to the beginning of these events, in December 2023, my grandfather injured himself going down the stairs and was hospitalized. In his absence, both my mother and I, as well as my grandfather while he was in the hospital, realized something had changed inside our home. Only days after his hospitalization, both my mother and I repeatedly heard footsteps and movements downstairs in the basement, where my grandfather's room is located. Many times, we chalked it up to just old house noises, wood creaking, the house settling, etc. Until more physical things started happening. The downstairs bathroom sink running, the washer and dryer machines being open when they were previously closed, doors being open that were previously closed, items that were once on shelves found on the ground, entire filing cabinets of papers spilled on the floor, lights flickering or turning completely off when in a room. Once, the stereo or radio system we had downstairs randomly turned on and blasted the radio for a few seconds before turning off as I walked past. Those were all the things that happened inside the house. What's even freakier, and what made the rest of the family worried, were two specific instances in my grandfather's hospital room. The first time was in front of my mother and aunt, and the second time was just my aunt. The first incident happened later in the day after dinner when my mom and aunt were there. My grandfather leaned into my mother's ear and whispered, "Who's that over there? Is that a nurse?" and pointed to the corner of the room. My mom was confused and told my aunt, who also became confused because, obviously, no one else was in the room. They thought it was just him seeing things because the nurses had said he wasn't entirely lucid after his fall. The second time was much more intense and left my aunt hysterically calling my mom late at night. She told my mom that my grandfather was starting to fall asleep when he jolted up with a horrified look on his face and quietly told her that the devil himself was standing behind her. She freaked out, stood from her chair, and turned around but saw nothing. She calmed down, sat back in the chair, and tried to ease my grandfather. However, he never calmed down and then loudly yelled, "He's trying to grab you." My aunt said she felt something touch her shoulder and a breath on the back of her neck. She quickly called my mom soon after, in a panic, and my mom advised her to go home for the night. There were no further incidents in the hospital after that. After that, there seemed to be less activity at our house until my grandfather passed away a few weeks ago. Since then, my mother and I have continued to hear odd sounds, objects being misplaced, and lights going on and off in the basement. But about an hour ago, something particularly eerie happened. My mom came into my room at around 10 p.m. and randomly asked if I wanted ice cream. I said sure and went to the door to put my shoes on. My mom said that I didn't have to go if I didn't want to, so I chose to stay home. As she left, she told me to lock the door behind her. After she left, I went to the bathroom, and when I got out, I promptly locked the door. I should note that our screen door wasn't locked, but was definitely latched. After closing the door, I went back to my room, sat down, and continued playing a game with my headphones on. About 10 to 15 minutes after my mom had left, I very clearly heard her voice yelling my name to come grab the ice cream. I got up and speed walked to the door, yelling, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you get home." As I turned the corner to the front door, I noticed it was slightly ajar, the screen door wide open, and my mom and her car were nowhere to be seen. I was quite spooked because the sound of my mom's voice was so loud that I heard it over the floor fan in my headphones. I re-locked the door and locked myself in my room until my mom got home with the ice cream. I told her what had happened, and she was also spooked. Together, we searched the house in case someone had actually gotten in, but we found nothing. I also forgot to mention that the majority of the time, our two dogs never bark at anything except for a few times in the basement, 2 to 3 times. I don't know how to end this post, but the only upside is that we are moving soon, and hopefully, this stuff won't keep happening in the new place we're moving into. Back in 2008, I dated a girl who lived in Abergavenny, South Wales, UK. Abergavenny is a very old Welsh market town with various ancient buildings and a rich history. My ex, let's call her C, lived in an old toll house with her sister and mother. This house was on the corner of what used to be the main road many hundreds of years ago. It had the classic Tudor look, with exposed black timber beams crisscrossing white painted stone walls. Although the house had undergone extensive renovations in the early 1900s, the site of the toll house and its layout had remained unchanged for several hundred years. The downstairs lounge room was set quite low into the ground, as the house was effectively built on an embankment. This meant the rear wall of the lounge was beneath the natural ground level. C would often mention that behind this rear wall, there used to be an old access tunnel that led to the nearby castle, about 500 meters away. The ruins of the castle are still there today. The tunnel had collapsed hundreds of years ago, and the entrance to it was boarded over. The rear wall of the lounge even had the remains of the tunnel's stone entryway arch as a feature, though it was blocked off beyond a single layer of masonry. It was common in medieval times for monks at monasteries and castles to use access tunnels to travel in and out of the grounds and townships. I was always intrigued by the collapsed tunnel behind the lounge room wall, especially because it always had a cold draft, no matter the time of day. I never thought much of it until strange things started happening. The first curious event occurred when I wasn't actually there. I was on the phone with C one evening, chatting about our days at school and other things 15 or 16-year-olds typically talk about. Suddenly, mid-sentence, I heard a whoosh and a loud bang, followed by a tiny yelp from C on the other end of the phone. There was silence. I asked if she was okay. After about 5 seconds of deafening silence, she shakily responded, "Yes, but my science textbook just flew off the shelf across the room at me." She then brushed it off as if it was nothing. "Wait, what?" I asked her. C replied, "Yeah, it happens all the time. My house is very haunted." She was so casual about it that I found it quite comforting, especially considering I was going to stay there that coming weekend. But it also made me think, was this normal for her? Nothing happened for some time after that, but one evening about 2 months later, we were sitting in the lounge downstairs watching TV when I heard what sounded like her little sister shuffling around upstairs. "How long has her sister been home?" I asked. C replied, "She isn't home yet. Nobody is. She just texted me." We looked up at the ceiling above us, as we clearly heard more shuffling footsteps on the upstairs level, creaking the floorboards. The footsteps sounded almost muffled and soft, like someone who had just woken up. It's hard to explain, but they were definitely footsteps. We were both creeped out, but went upstairs to check if someone had broken in via the rear window. A burglar had recently entered the house that way. We found no one there, and all the windows and doors were closed. We went into C's bedroom and closed the door behind us, leaving it slightly ajar, and sat quietly, trying to hear the footsteps again. After several minutes of sitting in the quiet, uneasy atmosphere, we decided to head back downstairs since we heard nothing. What happened next is something I will never forget. As I approached the bedroom door, I reached out for the handle to gently push it open. The door was only slightly open and not on the latch. As my hand was about to clasp the door handle, the door slammed in my face with the loudest bang ever, as if someone had shoulder barged it from the other side. Instinctively, I tried to turn the door handle to open the door, but I could feel the force of someone trying to turn it against me. The knob turned with some resistance, as if someone was holding it, but then it snapped back to a closed position with force. The only way I can describe it is that it felt like an actual person was on the other side of the door, playing a prank on us, holding the doorknob as hard as they could, and leaning all their body weight into the door itself. I could even hear the old timber door creaking under the pressure of something pushing it hard from the other side. Then, suddenly, after a few seconds, the resistance disappeared. I turned the doorknob and the door swung open freely. There was absolutely no way a person could have done that and then hidden somewhere in the house so quickly. We rushed from room to room and found no one hiding. All the windows were closed, and the front door was still locked from the inside. It suddenly occurred to me that as I was closing the door before it slammed, the sliver of light from the ajar door had vanished. It was pitch black, as if it were the dead of night on the landing, or something very dark and translucent was blocking the light coming through the gap in the door from floor to ceiling. The image of this still creeps me out to this day. From then on, things literally started to go bump in the night. One night, I stayed over in the guest room and got up to use the bathroom around 3 a.m. The toilet was downstairs. When I was heading back to the base of the stairs, I heard a loud thump from the lounge room. I stared into the pitch black beyond the old crooked doorway leading into the lounge. I could tell the thump was coming from the rear wall, like someone's fist softly hitting a hollow plasterboard wall, as if someone or something was behind the hollow wall where the collapsed tunnel entrance was. I stood there in frozen shock, my eyes watering with pure fear like I had never experienced before. I bolted upstairs and woke up C. We sat on her bedroom floor, listening to the thumping, which went on for what seemed like 30 minutes or so, getting slower and softer until it eventually disappeared. I'm sure other events happened in that house that I didn't notice. Her mom used to drink a lot and would tell us vague stories about the moaning she heard from behind the lounge room wall most nights. I even saw C's bedroom door open behind her on a webcam call, and her mirror got thrown off the wall and smashed on the ground. Whatever was in that house had a sad but sinister feeling to it. We broke up not long afterward, and I never went back there. But I did drive past the house recently, some 16 years later, and it gave me chills like nothing else in a long time. Thank you for watching, and that was 3 true scary Reddit stories. And if you found this video frightening, please make sure to smash that subscribe button and give the like button a frightening experience. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next video.